Hello, and welcome to Exploring Global Problems, a podcast where we talk to academics from Swansea University, whose groundbreaking research is tackling global challenges, from health innovation to sustainable futures and the environment, from digital technologies to clean energy. My name is Sam Blaxland, and today I'm joined by Nuria Lorenzo-Dus, Professor of Language and Communication in the Department of Applied Linguistics at Swansea University. Her research explores the dark side of social media, focusing on the safeguarding of children and the prevention of online child sexual abuse. Nuria, welcome to Exploring Global Problems. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too, Sam.
To begin, obviously, it's worth saying at the outset that this is a disturbing topic, a sensitive topic, but could you just give us a broad overview of the major challenges that you're grappling with?
Yes, I think you're right in saying that this is a sensitive and issue because we're talking about vulnerable individuals, children, and we're talking about their abuse through digital technologies that otherwise can be hugely empowering. Because of that, it's very important that we actually address this issue with the sensitivity that it requires. The figures that we get on a daily basis about the number of cases to do with online child sexual abuse are really upsetting, and they increase year on year, and they increase in the UK and they increase globally. No matter how much knowledge and expertise you try and bring together, this is not an easily fixed issue. So that's one key challenge. We're not just academics. In my case, I'm also a mother, and a mother of a teenage daughter and a younger daughter as well. And to be able to do research into online child sexual grooming when you've got children yourself and children of an age which is regarded as, highly vulnerable. So that is a challenge as well from a research point of view, not just the scale of the issue, but the fact that it is a highly sensitive, deeply upsetting subject matter.
You said that cases are on the rise.
That's right, yeah.
Why might that be? Is it partly because we're better able to detect the cases, or are there other factors at play here?
I don't think there's just one factor. There are a number of factors. One of them is clearly the fact that, access to social media by children is now normal, in ways that it wasn't, say, 10, 15 years ago. So that might be one key reason for the scale. But also is the fact that the perpetrators are also able to exploit technology and digital technologies in ways that perhaps they weren't able to exploit, again, 10, 15 years ago. So we have this combination of an increased access to social media and a normalization of that access, which, as I said, can bring also a lot of positives. And the fact that perpetrators are able to exploit that interest in social media for their own to their own advantage.
Yeah, what kind of tactics do adults who are grooming young people online use?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I always like to say that when I get asked about the tactics, I like to say that the good news is that those tactics are patterned, i.e. they follow specific regular ways, which for me brings us hope, because it means that if we can actually model what those patterns are, if we can actually identify regularities in the way in which they groom children online, then we are one step closer to being able to detect and certainly prevent, the issue. What are those tactics? Well, we've been looking at the language that online child sexual groomers used. So my research has not looked at images so far, even though I'm conscious that that is really quite a problem at the moment. And we've been looking at the language that they use, and we've been identifying not just words that are sexually explicit that get repeated on those words are there and are very frequent. We've also been looking at different expressions and different intentions that these perpetrators have and how they word them. And we've looked at these in really large data sets, millions and millions of words, and we've identified a number of goals or intentions, which therefore mean tactics that they use. So one of them, for example, would be to develop the trust of the child victim. And obviously to do that for deceptive purposes rather than, as a mean to genuinely, become a friend of the victim. And to do that, they'll use a number of strategies, language strategies, that you and I will also use when we want to get close to each other as friends, as well as other types of relationships. So we'll then show an interest in how you spend your time. So hobbies, pastimes. They'll also be asking about other relationships that you may have, with other friends, with family, with other maybe boyfriends, girlfriends, and so on. They'll be praising the victim. They'll be paying a lot of compliments, many more compliments actually that you would find normally in any interaction. But the interesting bit is that those compliments will not necessarily be targeting sexual attributes of each or characteristics of the child victim. They may be about their level of maturity, or how nice they are, or how well they play a particular game online. So they are not always sexually explicit, and I think that's quite an important finding with regards to the tactics. So all of this is part of the development of trust, which is the main goal or intention that groomers try and achieve when they are manipulating children online. In addition to that, they'll also try and isolate or separate the child victim from those who mean anything in their lives. That may be parents, that may be other friends, other relatives, anybody that they perceive to be an obstacle on their way to getting or gaining exclusivity. And this isolation could also be physical, so trying to see how they can get to the child victim on his or her own, or emotional affective, which means that they probably will be maybe implicitly criticizing mom and dad, who are, not so good because they don't let you do this, and they don't think that you are that, that mature, but I think otherwise, and so on. So this sort of tactic of isolation is quite important. Another tactic has to do with all the time gauging how likely the child victim is to go along with whatever it is that they are proposing, whether that's to swap an indecent image, or to arrange to meet, physically in the physical world. And to do that, they use, again, a range of strategies. They may use reverse psychology, but also they may use bribes, coercion, threats, and so on. And then perhaps the tactic that most people tend to think of when they think of online child sexual grooming is one that we refer to as sexual gratification. And what it means is that they will be introducing language that desensitizes the child to sexual behavior. And sometimes they use that alongside reframing, linguistic reframing. So they will present sexual behavior between an adult and a child as if it were beneficial to the child in the future. Those are the main tactics that they use. I think it's very important to say that those tactics are not used sequentially. They actually are interlinked in how they use. So it's not that first they do one bit, then they do the next one, then they do the other bit, and so on. But what we have instead is this entrapment network, which happens through language and also images, as I said earlier, but which happens through communication. And that can happen very fast, but it can also take a long time, and cases vary, So those are the main tactics that they use. And as I was mentioning earlier, the important bit of news here is that when they use these tactics, they actually use regular expressions, regular sentences, quite frequently. So it's therefore possible to begin to anticipate and therefore detect what those regular ways of either isolating or obtaining sexual gratification and so on may be.
And I see here where your role as Professor of Language and Communication ties into this so clearly, and I will come back to talk about your specific research. But just before that, this term grooming that you've used a couple of times, does that mean something specific? I assume it ties into what you've just said, but can you maybe expand upon that?
Okay. So the term grooming has to do with this notion of manipulation, and preparing for something. And that something obviously is illegal. It's a term that, etymologically has moved on, quite significantly from earlier meanings of the word, which were not necessarily negative, and we still use them in terms of like grooming a dog, or later on grooming for political, for a political career.
Sure.
To more recently, this sort of criminal sense in which you are preparing, through communication, somebody to do whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And it's interesting because the term, even though I'm using it in the context of online child sexual abuse, is also a term that is being used for other forms of manipulation across social media, including jihadi radicalization, but also what you might call, and indeed I call in my research, ideological grooming for political reasons. So extreme right grooming into extreme right movements and so on. That's the meaning of the term.
Great, thank you for clearing that up. What kind of platforms do these offenders often use? You talked about social media, but there must be a whole plethora of places, websites.
Yes, indeed. I mean, they don't. If they were only using one,
sure.
that would be quite nice. That would be quite nice from a research perspective. But no, they use pretty much a plethora of platforms, as you just said, and gaming, as well as more sort of traditional, if that's the word, social media platforms. I'm reluctant to name and shame, because it would be unfair to do that, quite honestly.
Yeah.
They do move. And also the other thing that we've noticed is they move from platform to platform. So again, it's not as if you may start, the grooming may start in a platform, but then, after a few interactions, then, the conversation and the grooming may then move on to one or two or three other platforms. I think it's important to say as well that these are, clear net platforms, so to speak, but there's also a hell of a lot of online child sexual abuse and grooming, as you can imagine, that happens in the deep web. And that's not an area that I've looked at yet, but I'm aware that that's an area that really requires being looked at more closely.
There's probably parents listening to you and thinking that this is a huge concern and something that they are worried about personally. What advice would you give to them?
The advice that I would give, because it's the advice that I have given myself in a sense and that I'm applying, is that there are a number of products out there, filtering software and so on, that is important that they use, but they're not 100% bulletproof, safe. Instead, what I think would work best is to combine that side of things, so being careful about, what levels of access, children have when they use the internet and social media, with a continuous conversation about what the risks, but also the opportunities are on social media. And that's not just like having a one-off chat and ticking that off and thinking, that's fine, woof, I've done it, we're safe. It's not like that at all. It's about using any opportunity to talk about the potential risks, and also, importantly, to talk about how to develop healthy relationships online as well as offline. And that, I think, is the positive spin that we can use. We've given a number of talks in schools and other places, and parents always ask that question, what can I do? What can I do? Should I remove the mobile phone? Well, no, obviously, clearly not. But the other thing that they also tend to be worried about is their own knowledge and understanding of technology.
That was going to be my question. Because I'm only in my late 20s, but I look at my students who I teach now, and their grasp of technology is far superior to mine. They use platforms that I've never heard of. And for people, between the relationship between an adult and a child, that gap is even wider, isn't it? So I assume that's a huge issue.
But that's a huge issue for parents who feel that places them at a disadvantage. Why not turn that around, flip it completely, and use that as an opportunity to learn? Why not place your child as the expert and you as a parent as a keen learner? And you don't have to start every conversation with, by the way, is that a platform used for grooming, or are you concerned that you're being groomed? No, it's about having a number of conversations about how do you use this social media.
Show me how Snapchat works.
Exactly. And once you've got that, you've got an opportunity to then take a conversation further, into the, in the way that you think it should be taken further. And I think children generally respond positively to that level of interest, rather than, where they are the experts, and they've got parents who genuinely want to learn about the technology that they use and how they use it.
Do you look at all the technology that's out there and all the platforms and think, wow, there is a lot of stuff there. It is actually a little bit intimidating.
I look at as many platforms as I can, and I look at them as opportunities rather than as risks per se. The online child sexual, the issue of online child sexual grooming could happen in 1 to 31 million platforms. As I said, it's not just platform specific. So to look at them as increased threats rather than as what I think they are, which is, technology opportunities that we need to learn to use and make the most of, would be, I think, unhelpful for parents. So I don't tend to be scared by the sheer amount of, options that we have. Rather the opposite. I try and think that they are opportunities for us to, to make the best use that we can of digital technology.
So things like social media, do you see that as broadly more liberating than it is problematic because it connects people and it helps you keep in touch with friends and all that sort of stuff? Do you have a generally positive view of
I do,
of those things?
I do, and children do.
Yeah.
I think generally. That's not to say that the dark side of social media is not there, and clearly my research is into that.
Sure.
But I generally think that the positives outweigh the negatives. Yeah.
Lots of the child sexual abuse crimes go unreported, don't they?
That's right, yes.
Yeah. Why?
Well, there are many reasons why, many reasons why, and some of them have to do with how the victims may feel about, what's happening to them. Just, the sheer trauma that they're going through or that they've been through. But one of the reasons which our research shows, to be quite telling in this respect, is that a number of victims or child victims may not realize for some time, at least, that they're being groomed, and they believe instead that they are in a romantic or friendship-based relationship with the adult who's obviously abusing them online. And we've looked into this quite in a lot of detail because our research shows that there are many occasions in which the language that the perpetrators use is sexually implicit rather than sexually explicit. I was giving you earlier the example of compliments and how they may not necessarily be compliments about sexual attributes. They may be about personality features. But you also have groomers using verbs such as vague language, verbs such as like or hug or cuddle, where they really do not mean that. They mean sexual activity with a minor. They also use a lot of this implicitness in the way they communicate. At some point, they will be explicit. I'm not saying explicit and it's not there, which means that the child may feel that they are really in a special relationship, that the groomers care about them. And that's why, for some time, they may not realize that that's what's happening to them. And by the time they do, then they feel too ashamed. They may feel that it's their own fault, that they are responsible for it, that they, in a way contributed actively, to what are now, at some point, they will believe to be abuse. So that, I think, is one key reason why many cases go unreported. I think it's also fair to say that the legal system up until recently, at least in the UK, has not been that helpful. But since 2017, it has become an offence, a criminal offence, to send a sexual message to a child or sexual message to a child across the UK, regardless of whether there's therefore later on an intention to meet offline with that child for the purpose of sexual abuse, and regardless as well of how explicit that message is.
Okay.
And I think that's really helpful.
Just for definitions here, this would be an adult, a person over the age of 18, sending a message to a person under the age of 16. Is that correct? Or under the age of 18?
18.
Okay. Which leads me to think that in almost all cases, obviously, it's obvious that the activity and this sort of behaviour is illegal and it's immoral and all that kind of stuff. But there must be some grey areas where I can't conjure up a real world example, of course, but maybe where two people who are of similar age are talking to one another, but there's not that much of an age gap, but the line of adulthood does run down the middle. Are there grey areas like that?
There are grey areas like that. I cannot give, but legally there is very clear cut.
Sure.
But there are there are a number of cases that I've been made aware of in which you have precisely the situation that you've described, where the perpetrator is just over 18, may have actually been perhaps, under 18 when the whole thing started, and then becomes over 18. And the victim may be very close in age, still a minor. And those are difficult cases. But as I said, the law is the law. And it's just, just the way it is.
The law is the law. And obviously most cases probably aren't sort of grey areas like that. No. They are clear cut, and the law is being very clearly broken. Yeah. You said the law's been improved. Mm-hmm. What was wrong with it beforehand?
The fact that the offence of sexual communication was not an offence. You needed to show that there was sexual abuse offline, which is not. It just doesn't really cover, or indeed reflect the situation, because there are many cases in which perpetrators are actually not intending to meet the victim online, where the abuse exclusively happens online, and I am deliberately using the term abuse, because what they're doing, online is not just having an innocent chat. There's clear abuse there. So I think it's also important that, for children and for teenagers, I think for a number of us as well nowadays, the boundaries between online and offline relations and experience and how you perceive your life are not as clear-cut as, we would like perhaps to think that's the case. For them, these relationships, and for many victims of online child sexual grooming, these relations online are as real as the ones that they have offline with other individuals.
One more legal question. Were there countries before the UK that were leading the way in tackling this sort of stuff?
I think we, again, without providing sort of a list, but I think the UK is doing reasonably well with this. The European Union is obviously also well advanced in this area. I think it's probably fair to say there are a number of other countries where the legal regimes are not as strong as they could be. And that's why I think it's very important that the research that my team and I do is not just about raising awareness or about describing or identifying tactics and so on, but it's also about trying to push reform and to do that globally. The internet doesn't know any about geographical boundaries. The problem is a global problem. It's not a nationally bounded problem. And I think that's why it's very important that we go and talk to other individuals in other countries. And in fact, one of the things that I've done recently is I attended an event in Latin America in which I'm trying to develop, a line of research in this area in languages other than English, and in Latin America we've got Spanish and Portuguese, both languages I'm able to, to work with. And I was really excited, about the level of interest that I've had in that region, in that huge region, where, as I said, perhaps in some areas the legal regimes are not as forward as we would like them to be.
Understood. In which case, let's talk about your research and how you specifically deal with this. So, tell us what you do.
In terms of how I go about doing my research?
Yeah.
Okay.
And on a day-to-day basis, how do you conduct that research?
Okay. So because I look at language, what I'm working with are texts, so I'm looking at conversations or chat logs from online child sexual grooming cases. It's very difficult to get real data and real chat logs from these contexts for obvious reasons, but I've been very fortunate to develop a partnership with law enforcement whereby we are looking at these real chat logs. And the way that we work is that we use a combination of quantitative and qualitative techniques, and we use software because the size of the data sets, so the corpora, that, as we call them, that we are working with is huge. We need to use some methods and some software that will help us get to the patterns. So we will typically mine those data sets looking for recurrent terms, but also we will be looking at recurrent terms as they are used in context, because you can imagine that words can mean different things depending on, the particular environment in which they are used. So we'll be looking at longer fragments, as well, and identifying the grooming intention, but also the repeated words, as I said, and expressions that are normally used. Once we've got those, we'll derive statistical information about their salience, how frequently they're used. And on the basis of that, we'll be able to model all this work. And then is when collaborative work kicks in. And the team and I work across disciplines. That's very important for us. So we work with computer scientists as well. So we are now using the wealth of linguistic knowledge that we've derived from our analysis, as I've just described them, so quantitative and qualitative, and feeding that into artificial intelligence models. So we're developing cutting-edge hybrid models, which are very different from what is currently out there, what tends to happen is that you take off-the-shelf AI products and then use them to analyze texts. We're flipping it. We're doing it differently. We've got all this linguistic knowledge that is taking us quite a while to get to, and we're using that to inform the artificial intelligence. That makes the artificial intelligence also more explainable. It's no longer a black box.
Sure.
And that's important. So it's this intersection and this synergy between social sciences, arts and humanities, so linguistics, but also criminology and computer science that I think is getting us closer to identifying, potential solutions to this large-scale issue.
It's a disparate group of academics coming together there, isn't it? Like you say, people from the arts and humanities, people from computer sciences. On a very just practical basis, how do you work with these people? What's your... how is the work divided up, or how does it come together at the end?
Well, I think for me, it's essential that I work across disciplines. I really love it, and the team really love it. And I think the one thing that we've all realized, that we've been working together for about 5-6 years now, this team. And the one thing we realized is that we needed a common language, to start us with, whereby similar concepts will exist across the disciplines, but are being labeled differently. So developing this common language is a very important part of the process. Once you have that, then what you need to, or what we tend to do, is we tend to make sure that we work as a team genuinely, playing to everybody's strengths, but also making sure that we don't end up in silos where I have no idea what's going on once the work gets to the AI team and they don't know what we're doing with their corpus linguistics work, for example. Instead, I tend to always get sub-teams that are always cross-disciplinary. And we may perhaps, progress a little bit less fast than we would if we were just getting on with what we're expert at. But at least I know that everybody in the team knows enough about what everybody else is doing. We have regular meetings and we learn a lot about what new methods everybody's using in their own fields. We do, reading sessions where we share our understanding and so on. So I think it's really great. I cannot conceive of research that is not working across disciplines. I don't think I would feel as excited as I do when I work with colleagues from other disciplines.
And these colleagues and these teams that you work with in the other disciplines, where are they based? Are they in Swansea University as well, or are they further afield?
And both, yeah. So the core team is based in Swansea University, but we also have other colleagues who work in other universities within the UK, but also in Europe and indeed further afield.
I appreciate that. Obviously, on a day-to-day basis, you're actually just looking at databases and you're running things through software, but nonetheless, the subject matter and the topic is troubling. Mm-hmm. How do you cope with that on a personal level? Do you sometimes find yourself a little bit overwhelmed by the subject matter that you're dealing with?
Yes. Well, I think I mentioned earlier that we look at language. We don't look at images. I personally draw a line. I would not be able to look at images for personal reasons. But the other thing that I think is very important to say is that because I work as part of a team, then we rarely do data analysis on our own. So we have a secure location where we look at the data, and as far as possible, it's always two of us, or there will be two or more than two of us in the room if it involves working on the data set for for more than, say, a couple of hours. It's important to have that reassurance that you've got somebody next to you if you need to. In addition to that, we run regular sessions where we discuss how we feel about it. Researcher well-being is paramount in this area, absolutely paramount in this area. So drawing upon best practice from what colleagues in law enforcement do in this area, then we've developed our own robust protocol. And that, for example, also involves a walk in the park where we may actually go for a little walk and then just talk about anything that, comes to mind. And then if anything is upsetting us, or if, then we will share it. If we don't feel like that, we won't share it. We try and also use humor as much as we can, not that we would obviously laugh at, what's going on, but try and diffuse, the stress. And that, undoubtedly can come from looking at these data on a regular basis.
And we're lucky here that we've got a park.
That's right.
The campus is in a park, so if you want to go for a stroll, then it's easy to do so.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Good. Or the beach, even if it's a nice
right.
day.
We've done both.
Good. We've talked about colleagues within universities. What about people who you work with outside of universities? You mentioned law enforcement agencies, but I know that you work with certain NGOs as well.
Yes.
So do you want to say how you work with those people?
Well, one of the things that I was very clear in my own mind right from the outset is that if I was going to do any kind of applied research, which I like doing, then I would really need to go and talk to those who could make it happen and help it make a difference. So NGOs, charities such as the NSPCC, for example, with whom we've done work in the past in terms of developing prevention materials, but also law enforcement are, I would say that they are part of our team in the sense that we work very closely with them. And this is not just about presenting them with the findings of our research and then taking that forward. It's actually involving them right from the outset in identifying what the key critical issues are for them. So it's them who identify their intelligence requirements. We then think about what methods we can bring into the process. We discuss with them how the research is progressing. They help us focus on what is really important to them. And then that is, I think, the key to making a difference. So we adopt that way of working when it comes to, for example, trying to develop an online grooming detector tool. So we need to know what that tool would do. What would, for example, if it were going to be used by law enforcement, what would be their requirements? What would be the most pressing need that tool should be able to try and, address? With agencies, or charities and so on, again, in terms of development of materials, what formats would they want the materials to be? Do they want an app? Do they want a chatbot? Do they want a digital resource that they can just simply download? Is that level of, continuous collaboration with our stakeholders that I think is really paramount to being able to take the research from the theoretical or sometimes even applied place where we conceive of it as academics into the reality,
into a practical basis.
Because
this is one of the most common criticisms leveled at academics, isn't it? That we're too theoretical, but we don't think about the practical implications of things sometimes. Right. But you do work with these organisations,
definitely. Yeah.
And is the aim to either now or in the future develop a method that can catch criminals?
Yes, yeah. So
basically,
what we're looking at is, as I referred to earlier, we're looking at various tools or digital interventions, and one of them is geared towards detection of grooming language, and detection that would be more sophisticated than what is currently out there by, for example, looking at implicit expression of sexual intent rather than just explicit expression of sexual intent. But I don't see that as sufficient in its own right. The way that we think about this is always coupling it with research geared towards, or development of interventions geared towards prevention. So awareness raising for example, professionals whose main job is to safeguard children, whether that's educators or social workers, But that's the prevention side of it is really important.
And lots of academics work on, I don't know, experimental drugs, for example, that they hope one day is actually going to cure the problem that they are exploring. It's probably not that straightforward with you, is it? Or that you can't be that optimistic about it. This is always going to be a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think we can solve it, overnight.
But you aim to make it better.
But I think I'm quite positive that there is certainly potential for improving significantly the solutions that are currently out there. And I think in that sense, the integration of, knowledge and expertise from linguistics and also from, computer science that I refer to, as well as the background that comes from maybe public policy as well as criminology. And, this combination of, expertise and the tools that we're developing, they make me quite positive about, being able to make a difference. Whether or not we're able to solve it, well, certainly not overnight, but I think there is hope.
You are hopeful.
Definitely.
Let's talk about you for a minute. How have you ended up here as a professor at Swansea University? What's your career trajectory been like?
Okay, so I first did my undergraduate degree in Spain, where I come from. I did English and German language, and then I came to the UK to do postgraduate studies, and I focused on how we construct our identities in the media. So strategic identity construction is what I was looking at. Initially, I was working on broadcast media, but then, as we've discussed, then I've moved on to digital media and the dark side of social media specifically. So that's how we started getting interested in essentially identity construction, because the groomers and the perpetrators, that's what they're doing also. They are portraying images and constructing their own identities, in ways that are appealing to others. And they are therefore manipulating others through identity and the performance of their own selves, So that's how I became interested in that area of research. And that's what I've continued to do for a number of years now. I mentioned several times the research team. I'm incredibly fortunate to work with a research team of early career researchers. And I'm passionate about developing that kind of expertise and the interest that I see in making a difference in others, especially, the talented others with whom I work. Because of that, within the university, I also have a management role, and that is to do with postgraduate research. I'm the Dean of Postgraduate Research, and that means really trying to create an environment whereby not just the future leaders, because the postgraduate researchers that we have at Swansea are our current leaders already. They are leading in their own research areas. They're pushing the frontiers of knowledge. And that's why I'm interested in working with them, to make sure that their experience is as positive as it can be here at Swansea.
I remember somebody telling me when I was one of the few PhD students in my department saying, you're the only researcher here. We've all got to do administration and lots of teaching. PhD students do lead the research field, don't they? Like you say,
yeah. They are researchers. I rather refer to them as researchers than as students. Yeah.
How do you divide your time between your own research and managing other people's research, or managing the strategy or whatever it is you do?
Yeah, well, I try to be quite disciplined. I do not always manage to do that, but I try to get 1 or 2 days a week where I would be focusing primarily on research. Obviously, if anything comes up with it, which is urgent to do with a management role, then I will attend to it as well. But I try to devote, time and block time every week to do research. That's normally not difficult at all, because something that I'm passionate about. So I will find the time to do the research. The difficulty is finding the time for family and for life outside of your work. And that's the bit where I think, in academia, we should probably try and focus a little bit more on our well-being, as individuals.
I'll agree to that.
Yeah.
You said for your original degree, you did English and German.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think you said earlier you speak Spanish and Portuguese.
Portuguese would not be native-like, but yes,
okay.
And Catalan too.
I was wondering how many languages you are proficient in. That's not bad.
But I'm trying my best with Welsh too.
Oh, well, Diane. Okay, let's just think about the future of your topic. Looking forward to the challenges that you face? What are those main challenges?
Well, I think there are a number of those challenges. One of them is to do with securing funding to be able to conduct the extensive research that is required to make sure that we move from where we are to where we need to be. And that, in the current climate is always a challenge. The second challenge is probably something that we've alluded to in the course of this conversation, which is the fact that this is not an easy fix. The bad guys are always going to be perhaps one step ahead of us. So to be able to have that, to bear that in mind, but also keep the positive attitude and the ability to then see through those challenges and not be defeated by them, I think is really important. In doing that, I also mean not to be too negative about social media or digital media. So I've tried to emphasize that, it's got more positives than negatives as far as I'm concerned. So I think that is a challenge as well, not to get into a mindset that says this is way too difficult, this is way too risky, let's forget it. And I think probably the third challenge is to see this as a global issue, which it is. And therefore, it means that even though the research that I've done with my team up until now has been primarily or exclusively focused on the English language, this is something that can indeed be applied to other languages. So the challenge would be to get this sort of multilingual, national really, research agenda, and to make sure that we push reform from a global perspective rather than an isolated, nationally bound perspective.
Might technology develop to such an extent that it actually moves away from language
Yes.
and words?
Yes, indeed.
Rendering what you're doing not useless.
Well,
sense,
not that it might move away from language, but the way in which that language would be materialized would not necessarily be written language. So I've said to you that I'm looking at chat logs or records, transcripts of what essentially is text, written language. But there are also now cases where grooming happens through voice messaging and audio clips and videos, and it's not as if language is not happening.
Sure, understood.
Because I'm looking at language as communication, and we need to communicate, but that will pose different challenges. We're ready for them as well. There's software that exists so that it will convert, written text, audio to written text, and so on. But yeah, it's quite likely that language as we conceive of it nowadays will no longer be the primary tool. However, communication will, because online child sexual grooming is a communicative entrapment network rather than anything else.
And securing funding can be difficult as well?
It can indeed. That requires a lot of resilience. Keep trying and you'll get there.
And a lot of time as well, again, isn't it? We were talking about how you divide up your time.
Yeah, a lot of time, yeah. So I would say that, if I've applied for a number, I continuously apply for grants. And if I didn't do that, I probably would have written 3 books by now that I haven't done. But it pays off. It's important to keep trying. This is a worthy area of research and one that requires the funding.
And my next question was going to be about the worthiness of it, actually, which is that when you go home of an evening, you must feel like you're doing something good or something with a broader societal benefit.
Humbly, yes, I do. I think the research that we're doing can make a difference, and it's important. It's really worthy. A couple of years ago, I was asked about, how do we feel about this research and so on, and I remember that my answer concerned an anecdote that has stayed with me, a family anecdote that has stayed with me. So, I was working at home, and my youngest, who at the time would have been 6 years old, said, "Mum, is that an online groomer?" And I was answering emails at the time, so it was just text, and clearly nothing to do with online grooming. And initially I froze. I thought, my goodness, a 6-year-old should not even know this term, what's going on here? And that has stayed with me because for me, so obviously I used the opportunity to try and explain to her at the right level that there are bad individuals out there who may try and get, children to do things that they don't want to do. But I left it at that. But what for me was important was the fact that it made me think that what I'm trying to do will help in the sense that I cannot tell her what an online groomer looks like, and I don't think anybody can. But the work that we're doing can actually help them, can help us identify what a groomer sounds like, how they communicate, how regularly they will be drawing upon this strategy or that other strategy to try and achieve their goals. And I don't think that's I think that's a small step, but nevertheless an important step. So I think that reinforces the worthiness of their research.
Which might be a reason why people who are listening to this might think, this is good work. This is the right kind of thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they might be thinking, I want to get involved with this sort of stuff. So if somebody is in that position, how would you encourage them to do what you do?
Okay, if they have an interest in how language and communication work, then they need to pursue that interest, and they need to pursue that passion for understanding how we manage to get what we want out of others. So what I would encourage them to do, if they're interested in language, you can approach this issue from other disciplines as well. But if they're interested in language, I would encourage them to then pursue a linguistics degree, or to do some linguistics course that would enable them, or that will equip them with a toolkit that they need to be able to identify what's going on when we communicate. I would also encourage them to try and read widely around other areas. As I said, I don't believe in silo disciplines. It's important that we work across disciplines, and it's important that if you're good with computers as well, that you develop some maybe programming skills and so on, stuff that will make you feel more confident when it comes to not just using software, but also understanding, how that software works. And I think that's really important, to be able to then make whatever changes that might be required to get to the results that you want to achieve. So I would encourage them to pursue their linguistic passion. I normally say everybody needs a linguist, and in the sense that you need to have that expertise, that toolkit to enable you to make sense of what is something that we all do naturally, which is to communicate for good and for evil.
Nuria, it's been fascinating. Obviously, the subject matter is dark and troubling, but it's been very interesting to talk to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you want to find out more about Nuria's research, you can visit her staff profile page at Swansea University's College of Arts and Humanities. To find out more about this podcast and Swansea University's research, visit swansea.ac.uk/research. That's all from us today. Thank you for listening, and thank you again to our guest, Professor Nuria Lorenzo-Duz. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate and review. I'm Sam Blaxland, and that was Exploring Global Problems from Swansea University.